Now let's turn our attention to the document window itself and its toolbar that's running across the top of the window there. The document window is where you actually will be creating your web pages. We'll be getting into some of the Windows properties in the next movie, but first, let's take a look at the toolbar running across the top of the window. The document toolbar contains several buttons and menus that let you do things like change the document view, set the page title, preview the page in a browser, and several other things. So let's just work our way from left to right to get a brief overview of what's available up here, and we'll get into more detail with many of these items later. First of all, we have this group of 3 buttons: Code, Split, and Design. By default, we're looking at our page in Design View because we chose Design View when we first opened Dreamweaver for the first time, or if you're on a Mac, it just opens up in Design View by default anyway. Design View is a view that displays your page in what's called WYSIWYG mode, or what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. Unless you're a coder, this is the view that you'll use most often because the Design View hides all the behind-the-scenes coding that Dreamweaver is performing and lets you concentrate on just laying out the page. It gives you a pretty accurate depiction of what your page is going to look like in an actual web browser. Now, of course, the best way to see how your page looks in a particular browser is to actually view it in that browser, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Now, if you want to take a glance at the code, or if you want to go in and manually change the code, you can click the Code View button. This displays all the code that's necessary to create the page that we're currently looking at. Notice that even with what appears to be a blank page in Design View, we already have a fair amount of necessary code that Dreamweaver has already written for us to have this blank page. The third view is Split View, and this lets you see both the code and design views in separate panes in the same window. What's nice here is that if you make a change to the design pane, so if I click down here and type some text, you'll notice that the change also occurs up here in Code View, and that pretty much happens immediately. And if you manually change the code, actually I should click out of there we go. We see the text update down here in Design View. Now I should mention that there is another way in Dreamweaver to simultaneously view both the code and design views. Let me just go back to Design for a moment here. I have the option of going to the Window menu and choosing to show the Code Inspector, or I can activate that with F10, and that opens up the Code Inspector. And the advantage here is this lets me see my entire page in a larger view and lets me look at the code in a smaller window off to the side. So if I prefer to do that so I don't have a small cramped window to look at my page in, I can just have it set to Design View and then open up the separate Code Inspector, which shows me the exact same view of the code. So I press F10 and the Code Inspector disappears again. Okay, next we have the page title area. You can see title and then a field over here. Now the text that you enter here appears at the top of your browser window when the browser opens this page, and is commonly used as the title for the page when someone bookmarks the page in a browser. So you want to make sure that you give each of your pages a good descriptive name. We're going to talk a lot more about page titles in the chapter on document basics. Moving along, we have another series of buttons here to the right. The first one we have here is our browser target check button. This is a useful option that lets you validate your page's code to see how it's going to stand up in different browsers. From here you can select Check Browser Support if you want to run a check right away. Actually, it's telling me I need to save my document. I'm not really going to bother with that right now, so let me cancel there. Or you can select to have it auto-check every time you open a document. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later as well, but there's also some settings here that you can choose from to decide which browsers you want to test your page against. So the default here in Windows is Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator. So I'm just going to click Cancel and leave everything like that. And we'll talk more about that later again. Next we have our Validate Markup button, a new feature to Dreamweaver 8. This button lets you check your code for tag and syntax errors. You can choose to just check the current document, validate the entire current local site, meaning all the pages in your site, or validate just the particular files that you might have selected. If you choose the Settings button here, that'll take you to your Dreamweaver preferences and automatically select the Validator category. And then you can choose what type of code your page should be validated against. So for instance, if you wanted to make sure that you were following strict XHTML guidelines, you could select that, or any of these other document types here. Next we have our File Management button, and this lets you upload and download files from your web server to your computer or vice versa. We haven't set up our web server settings yet, so I can't show you much here right now, but we'll get to uploading and downloading in the chapter on getting your site online. Next, we have our Preview in Browser button, which launches your page in the browser of your choice so that you can see what it'll really look like in that particular browser. I'll show you how to set this up later in this chapter. Next button is our Refresh Design View button, which you can use if you've made some changes to the page's code that haven't shown up in Design View yet. Clicking Refresh tells Dreamweaver to wake up and look at the new code and update the Design View. Second to last, we have the View Options button, which lets you control several different options, but what you see in this menu depends on which view you're looking at here. So in Design View, I see I can choose to look at my head content. I can hide the rulers if I want to, or if I want to see them. I can turn on the grid, hide the guides if I want to, and so on. I'll just keep guides on and hide head content there again. But if I switch to Code View, the menu changes. Now I have things like word wrap, line numbers, hidden characters, all these different things that I may or may not want to see while I'm in Code View. If you switch to the Split View, you see both the Design and Code View options here. So the Code View options are here at the top, and the Design View options are here down at the bottom. It's also from this menu while you're in Split, you can choose to flip the positions and put Design View on top and the Code View on the bottom. So that's the View Options button. Go back to Design View there. And lastly, we have the Visual Aids button, which lets you show and hide various things like table borders, image maps, layer outlines, and so on. I can't really show you any of these things right now because the page is pretty much empty except for some text, but we'll be using this menu occasionally as we go along. And Macromedia has added some really useful features to this particular menu, which I'll be pointing out throughout these movies. So that's the document toolbar. It appears at the top of every document window, so familiarize yourself with that. So next we'll take a look at the actual document window itself.